All right, welcome back, guys. This is on lesson 1.3, collecting sample data. In the previous lesson, we discussed how to classify data or organize the data at different level, and we discussed there's more than one type data that we can classify them in, and we discussed of the data, level of measurement of data as well. In this lesson, we'll discuss um, some of the standard methods that researchers or statisticians use to collect sample data. It says here, in most cases, the populations being studied is very large, which happen a lot in real life. So statistics is used to obtain data from a sample, then use those data from a sample to project or draw a conclusion about the populations. And the issue is that is, the in order for us to make a conclusion on a larger population, we gotta make sure that the sample obtained from data is representative, meaning is it large enough that is representative of the entire population. Were the method of collecting data biased or not biased? How do we collect data in a way that is considered to be representative? So that's really important. And the word representative means the sample should reflect as closely as possible to the characteristic of the population under consideration, because the quality and the reliability of any statistical result is directly related to the quality and reliability of the sample. Um, Even though there are several different methods of sampling, each method used to collect sample incorporates some sort of randomness. This is how we try to minimize the bias when we incorporate randomness in our method of data collecting. And it said where each member of the population has an equal chance of being selected, right? So that way there's no bias there. It said random sampling significantly reduces the likelihood of introducing some form of bias into the sampling process. Um, so there's two type of random sampling. The one we're not going to focus on a lot is the simple random sampling. Anytime we refer to random sampling, we're referring to just it is simple random sampling, but in a way it's not. The two definitions are very closely related. Um, we're just gonna focus on just random sampling, where it says that each member of the population has an equal chance of being selected. Whereas simple random sampling is where every single size n, meaning a different sample size, has a equal way of being selected. So it's slightly different, but not that important. The four methods we discussed in this section, how to collect data is systematic sampling, convenience, stratify, and clustering. We're gonna go through these four. I'm gonna read the definition. I'll try to present them in a more visual aspect as well, so that way it's clear. And so we can understand the difference between each of the methods, especially the two that are very closely related, are the cluster and stratify sampling. Anyway, the first one is called systematic sampling. So to collect data, this is one way to collect data. We randomly select some starting point k in the sample set or in the population. Then select every kth element of the population. Um, Meaning we have a certain we have a systematic method. If we start with the first person, think about in the classroom environment, we pick the first person, then we can say, okay, we're gonna pick every third person in a row or something like that. So some sort of kth element. We're not selecting the entire population, but just a part of the population, but it's picking in a systematic, some numerical or mathematical sequence. All right, think of a sequence. All right, sequence. Convenience sampling. So this is where we can obtain data by using convenience sampling. This is where result that easy to get. If we want to find out something, we ask our family members or friends or things like that. If we want to do some collecting data, we go straight to Google. Things that are very easy to access to get a result, and that's probably not the best way to have a result that is valid, because it's convenience and could consist of a lot of bias within our data. Stratify sampling. So this is saying that subdivide the population to at least two different subgroups or strata, so that the subjects within some subgroups share same characteristics such as gender or age bracket. Then we draw a random sample from each subgroup. Okay, so first we divide the population into the strata, and then where the subject within the strata share the same characteristic, like, oh, this group is all male, the other one group is all female, such and such, and then we draw a random sample, random sample or sample from each subgroup. Okay, where cluster sampling, this saying that first we divide the population into clusters or strata, but these clusters, the subject within the cluster, not necessarily share the same characteristic here. So that's the first difference between stratifying and clustering. So after we divide the population into clusters, we randomly select a few of those clusters, some of those clusters, not all the clusters, just a few, randomly select a few, then choose all members, all subject within those clusters to survey or to collect data. Okay, so that's the word all is being highlighted for that reason. Let me go ahead and sketch the difference between these two here in terms of picture. All right, so we have stratify sampling, and then we have cluster sampling. Okay, so stratify, let's start with the population. So let's say we have the population. Oh, let me just do a simple population. Over here we have population. Okay. Population. Okay. So with stratify, we're gonna divide this into strata. So maybe just strata, just, so these are strata. Okay, where these stratas share the same characteristic. Let's say if I can do this here. So all these subject within the first strata share the same characteristics. So I'm going to denote them as green, and then this would be all purple, different characteristics, and perhaps over here all red, share red, and maybe this one we do pink, right? So these subjects, these individuals, these people are sharing the same characteristic in this strata, and then we randomly, so there was a randomly select. Oh no, actually what we do next here, we strata and then draw a random sample from each subgroup. Okay, so and then we do a random sample. So random sample from each group. So maybe a smaller circle, right? Smaller circle. Right, and then now the subjects or part of the studies will be these guys here. So the result data is all these guys here. Okay, so that's stratify. Okay, cluster sampling. Okay, let's start with divide these guys into clusters. All right, doesn't have to be 4. I just draw 4 arrows here. And let's say this cluster looks like this. We just have cluster, bigger clusters. And these clusters don't need to, the subject within the cluster don't really necessarily share the same characteristics. I'm just going to do ... They don't have to have the same characteristics. So the next step is what makes this cluster sampling method is different from stratify. The next method we said randomly select a few or some of these few of the clusters, then sample all subjects in those clusters. Okay, that means I'm gonna go ahead and select, maybe I'm gonna use red. I'm gonna just randomly select this guy, and then that guy. Just randomly select, okay? And then you know, sample all of this. Sample all. And that will be result data. Okay, so we sample every single subject in here from randomly selected field list cluster, and then the result data consists of all these guys here. Whereas Stratify, after we divide them into stratas, we pick a little bit of few subject from each strata, and then use that as part of a data collecting. Okay, so that's the difference between cluster and Stratify. Let's see. Let's apply these four methods of sampling in this example. It said identify which of these type sampling you use: random, systematic, convenience, Stratify, or cluster. Example 1a, the author collected sample data by randomly select 12 different pages from Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone, and then finding the number of words in each sentence on each of those pages. So we have to think about, okay, what is the population, what are the strata, what are the things that we're trying to, obtain here, what is the result? The result, what we're interested in is the number of words. This is the result. So the number of words are being obtained by selecting 12 different pages from Harry Potter. So the pages, so we have the book as the populations, and the book is being divided into pages, right? So we have book, 2 pages, right? So these considered to be clusters or strata. We don't know which method yet. Okay, and then from these pages, we select a few 12 pages. Select 12 pages. So, if well, these Harry Potter books are quite thick, so 1,000 or 5,000 pages, even more. So we divide the book by pages, and then we select 12 of those pages, and we count all the number of words in each sentence for all those pages. And then count all the words. Count all the words on each of those pages. So I'm going to say this method is cluster sampling. So the clusters are the pages that we're looking at. Okay. So cluster sampling. Okay. All right. Next, the New York State Department of Transportation evaluate the quality of New York State throughway by testing core samples collected at regular intervals of 1 mile. So every interval of 1 mile, the New York State Department of Transportation collect the core samples and then do a study on it. So there is a systematic of collecting sample data. So in this case, we're looking at systematic sampling. All right, so that's the keyword there. C, on the day of the last presidential election, ABC News organized an exit poll in which specific polling stations were randomly selected and all voters were surveyed as they left the premises. Okay, let's think about this. So we have voting poll stations, okay? And the ABC News organized an exit poll in which specific polling stations were randomly selected. So we don't know how many polls are there, but we know that the news people, survey people on certain specific poll station. It could be like 5 polling stations were selected, and then they survey all voters that come out of that exits. So it looks like to me this is another cluster, right? So the cluster could be the polling stations, and the few random selected polls are the random selected sample, and then we sample all voters exit the poll. So in this case, we can say this is another clusters. Okay. D, in a poll conducted by a certain research center, 1258 adults were called after their telephone numbers were randomly generated by a computer, and 49% were able to identify the vice president. So in a poll conducted by a certain research center, 1258 adults were called after their telephone numbers were randomly generated. So that's the keyword. So in this case, it's going to be just random. It's just going to be random. So it's going to be random sampling. Just just random. Okay, pretty simple. There's no cluster, there's no stratify there. Moving on to type of statistical studies. There are two types of study. We have the observational study and then we have the experiment study. So observational studies, and then we have experiment study. So observation is just like the name. You observe, you collect data, and you record. That's it. There's no modification at all. So observe and record data. That's it. Experiment study is when we actually modify the subject or give them treatment to figure out whether certain desired result is happening or not. So it said we apply some treatment, then proceed to observe the effects. So this is being used quite often in real life, because you can actually do a blind study where a single blind or double blind where you give these subjects certain drugs, but you don't tell them what they are receiving, and then you'll also not lend the person who administrates the drug what they're giving to the subject. So that will eliminate a lot of factors or lurking variables or any bias variable that could alter the result of the study. So this is being used quite often in real life here. So we have two examples, A and B here. They're pretty simple. When you read this here, one is straight observational, the other one is experiment, because where the subject are given treatment. Here's a word here, right? Words stop vaccine here. So two group will divide, one given a placebo effect, a placebo vaccine, the other one where it's actually given the actual vaccine, and you try to modify how that's going to affect the outcome. We have a definition of lurking variables. It says that experiments are often better than observational studies because randomly assigned to treatment groups, experimental studies help protect against potential unknown bias. Those are called lurking variables. They can interfere with the statistical analysis of the results, right? So I have an example I wanna go over here. So example, let's see. Let me erase this first. Okay, example. Here's example. Example, ice cream versus drowning. Okay, so we want to identify which statistical study is better to use and identify the potential or the lurking variable. Okay, so here is the example. We have increase in ice cream sale associate with increase in drowning. Okay, so how do we figure out if there's an actual correlation or association or one cause the other? So which method is better to use? All right, so in this case, you can pause the video and think about it. So does increase in the ice cream sales really associate cause the drowning victims here? So what we can do is we can say by using experiment study is better because because what? Because you can treat one group with ice cream while the other group with no ice cream, right? And then you just observe. Just then observe the role actually you observe not the role, the rate of drowning victims and see that ice cream consumption has no effect on drownings, right? So you just treat one group with ice cream, you feed one group of ice cream, you don't feed the other one with ice cream. You just gonna observe how many of those people eat ice cream actually drown or not. So in this case, certainly there's no causation there, it's just a correlations. So the lurking variable, what could tie these two factors? We can say that temperature, right? Temperature could cause or could tie these two variables. Temperature, the rise in temperature will increase the cells in ice cream and also increase in drowning because more people will go out swimming on the lake, right? So there it is. So that's all I have for you in this lesson 1.3 here.